You're in El Paso now, I assume.
That is correct.
Good.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a Texan hat hanging from my
Okay.
totem pole.
All right. We are now live. So let me introduce you. Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, but we're going to El Paso, Texas today. First time I've been there. And we're going to meet Arvind Singhal, who's a professor of communications at, I guess, the University of Texas at El Paso. Is that the right way to put it, Arvind? Very good. And my assistant, Adam Wynn, is going to be joining us as well today. Say hello, Adam.
Hello. Good to be on the show.
Okay. So Arvind, hi. How's everything in El Paso?
All is good. The skies are blue. The sun is shining. It's a pleasure to be with you, Meta.
Well, that's great.
And Adam.
I'm looking forward to our conversation because we're going to talk about something that has been on my mind for quite a while. Let me take a minute to set it up for the viewers to understand why well, frankly, oh dear, you know what? This could not have been recording. I'm going to start over. I beg your pardon.
Oh, Meta, it says it's recording.
Well, was it? Or it is right now?
It is right now recording, yes. And it has been for at least a minute or two. And it's live on YouTube as well.
Look, this microphone was saying that it's not. It was blinking. So, all right, I'm going to have to edit this out. But anyway, okay. Okay, I may have to do something at the end to edit, but okay, let's go forward. All right, let me explain why I'm going to start. I can fix it after a bit, I think, at the end in the editing, I think, Arvind, but it'll be awkward. Anyway, let me explain why I think I want to have this conversation. As many of you will have heard, I complain all the time about how I think democracy is broken, that we have crazy regimes coming to power all around the world. We had obviously the Trump regime in the US, but we have Modi, we have Duterte, we have, oh, I won't name them all. You can fill in the blanks, Bolsonaro, a bunch of what I consider plain lunatics in power. And they get in power perfectly democratically because the voters are lunatics. And that's really what's worrying me, that we have a large population of people who believe things like, if you get a vaccination, they're going to insert a chip into your body that will allow people to track you. That kind of thing that normally would be regarded as a strong sign of psychological disorder. But when you have, like a quarter of the voting population believing things like that and voting for people who have delusions, then there's something seriously wrong that you can't handle as an individual pathology. It means that the culture is messed up. And how do you fix a culture? Because I've never heard anybody really come up with an idea, a systematic way of saying we have to change the culture, and here's a program for doing it. Well, the only way I know to do it would be to change the cultural content, because people are immersed in a culture in which they see things that treat weird ideas as normal, and they tend to believe it. So what we have to do is create a culture to surround people that has sensible and good ideas and practical approaches to real problems, to acknowledging real problems and addressing them seriously, and so on. And this is a challenge for people who are specialists in communication. So Arvind Singh is a professor of communications, and he and I met in, I think, Atlanta, Georgia, for about 5 minutes, something like 15 years ago, and had a real short conversation about the use of soap operas for social change. And so I want to pick up that line of thinking, because I know that he teaches a course, or maybe a whole bunch of courses, that address that kind of issue. that we learn not only from our trial and error by getting our fingers burnt on a hot stove, but by seeing other people get their fingers burnt so that we don't have to do it. We can watch the harmful consequences that other people experience by adopting wrong ideas and wrong practices and wrong assumptions, and we can learn from their mistakes and what the penalties that they suffer as a result of having bad decisions. And so that's the theory I'm working on. It's called social learning theory. And I think we need to start off by paying tribute to a man who was one of the leaders of that strain of thought in social learning theory, Albert Bandura. Ivan, tell me about what you know about Bandura, because he died just a few weeks ago. And I think you were about to say that you had been in touch with his family. So that means that you must have known him, which I didn't.
Certainly, Meta, you're asking and raising good questions, very relevant to our times. Al Bandura, up until a few weeks ago, was the most honored, most respected, most well-known, most influential social psychologists that were living. His work lives on. He began early in his life to question a premise that you just alluded to, behaviorism by Skinner, where the assumptions were that you learn through direct experience, reward and punishment. And Bandura questioned that and took us, as you've said, into the realm of vicarious learning, that you can learn indirectly through the experience of others, not touching a hot stove. But I think more importantly, from our perspective in the context of media role modeling, Bandura's work, social learning theory, media role modeling, in essence began to point us in a way that you could not just learn from real models indirectly, vicariously, but you could also learn new models of behavior from mass media models, the popular culture, the content. And I think it was that leap, if you may want to call it, because the realm of symbolic modeling on mass media is in your control. You can author a certain scripts. You can show certain role models doing certain things, which, just to give you an example, I did work in India with a radio soap opera, very popular, called Taru, which was the name of the protagonist. She's a young, fiery woman, very polite, very proper, but very much aiming for a more equal status for little girls and women. And in this particular soap opera, Taru, which was broadcast since it was radio, the audience was mostly rural, in 4 of the most poor Indian states, poor not just in terms of socioeconomics, but also in terms of, the status of women. And in one of the episodes, a little girl, there's a dialogue, a snatch of conversation between her and her mother, in which she says, "How come you celebrated my younger brother's birthday, who just turned 1? And I'm 4 years old," or she probably doesn't even know how old she is, "you've never celebrated mine." Now, clearly, here was something which was scripted to address the issue of an unequal treatment of a brother who's 1 year old and an older sister. And the mother says, well, that's the way it is. And of course, the little girl is not satisfied. And so she runs to her grandmother and says, "Granny, how come, you celebrated his birthday or not mine?" And Granny says something and it still doesn't convince the little girl. So she goes out running, crying. And it's a very emotional scene that you are hearing. And then Taru, the protagonist, walks by and says, Lali, why are you crying? And she says, I want my birthday. I want my birthday. And Taru says, okay, we, the village of, whatever the fictional name of the village is, gonna come together and celebrate your birthday. So the birthday is announced on a radio soap of a little girl, Lali. And you can imagine, you build up to that episode. It's Lali's birthday. And, as a listener, you are tuning in to her birthday celebration. Clearly, it's a birthday celebration which is not celebrated alone. The entire village community is there. There are lots of little girls who are tugging on their mother's sari and saying, how come Lali gets to celebrate her birthday and why not me? And there are certain dads, and you can overhear them saying, well, if Lali can celebrate her birthday, so can we celebrate your birthday. Now, so Meta, did it surprise us as we were doing research that we learned that in certain communities, not all, in certain communities, there was a flurry of birthday celebration for young girls. And now you say, where did they learn this from? Okay, go back to Al Bandura. You can learn new models of behavior through role modeling, whether it's television, whether it's radio, and the story has changed by virtue of the symbolic modeling. And so getting this wrapped up in the introduction that you said, one way, some people say, of understanding a culture is to listen to the stories that people are telling. That you don't celebrate a girl's birthday. That's a story that's told. You celebrate a boy's birthday. So if you want to understand the culture, if you want to understand the norms, you listen to the scripts that are enacted, that are valorized, that are validated. And Bandura would say, you as a sociologist would agree that if you want to change a culture, you change the stories, you change the scripts, you change the language. Now that doesn't happen overnight, but go back to the feminist movement and the new language that has come with it. The term sexual harassment didn't exist at a certain point in time. The notion of depression, for instance, in terms of our sensibilities with respect to mental health didn't exist. So I think it doesn't happen overnight, but the potentiality lies in the telling of new stories through which you change scripts, through which you take audience members, those who are tuning in and those who are inspired to go to a place that they have not been. And so, you can call it narrative transportation, you can call it narrative persuasion, but it's in the flow of things that things begin to change.
I'm thinking back to the Middle Ages, not that I was there, but I believe they had things called morality plays.
Oh, yeah.
Where they were very consciously attempting to instruct people on good ways of living, moral living.
Yeah.
And in the churches, they would put on dramas in which the characters, I've read a few of those, and they look very heavy-handed, they're very didactic because they have characters named greed, or characters named sloth, or characters named lust, or that kind of thing. And they would be, that's who they were, that was their identity, and they would speak up as somebody justifying this kind of behavior. And then of course they would come to grief. Something would happen, and only one great virtue would survive at the end as the character trait that one should try to acquire. And I don't know whether they would put these plays on in churches, I believe. And I wonder, I wish there had been a social scientist there trying to take track of whether or not these really had any effect. And because I'm not sure how much even today social scientists are really documenting the impact and the social consequences of exposing people to particular types of drama, let's say on TV shows. Do violent television shows actually have any influence on the amount of violence in a society? That kind of question, I think, is so important, but I don't know whether anybody has even tried to prove it one way or another. You, as a professor of communications, will probably know if any such research does exist. Does it?
It does, and different scholars, social scientists come at it in different ways. Albert Bandura, as you know, was coming at it from the perspective of how does one learn new behaviors through, vicarious modeling, and of course there was the notion of reinforcement, positive and negative reinforcement given to a model. So if Lali is rewarded with a birthday, and if she has a good time and her father has a good time, then it may inspire. So modeling and its effects. There are people like George Gerbner, again, who's passed, but they were looking at what media does in terms of our cultivation of certain beliefs, pictures that we develop in our head, stereotyping, for instance. If you see a violent world on television, you begin to think that the world actually is violent, although what you see on screen may not be, let's say, an adequate or an accurate representation of what it really is. There are scholars who have studied how violence portrayals may create inhibitory or disinhibitory effects. Are you more likely to engage in violence, or are you less likely to, or the shade? So indeed, there has been a tremendous amount of work in this realm, continues to be, and more so, back to point, there's a tremendous amount of interest in this whole notion of narrative flow or narrative transportation or narrative engagement and persuasion. What are the mechanisms through which one is more likely to be transported to a place that they have not been. Our research also clearly shows, Meta, that being too didactic, as one would expect, nobody likes to be preached at. I don't know about morality plays in church settings, but that is usually a turn off. And I think that's where the beauty of these programs lies, in they not being didactic. You don't tell people this is what you need to do and sort of hammer it. So you're not in the business of telling, you're more in the business of showing what is possible when you celebrate a young girl's birthday. Or what will happen if you did something which another good example, since we are talking stories, there was a time when I worked with a wonderful organization in South Africa called Soul City. And they were taking on, and this has elements of violence in it, and that's the reason I wanted to give this example. They were addressing the issue of domestic violence, right? And domestic violence is as insidious as it can get because it happens in a sphere, in a container, the home, which you traditionally look upon as being a source of safety, security. So, when that is breached, when that is violated, it is, it not only does it have, marks, black and blue on your body or broken bones, it has tremendous implications for emotions and, your psychological makeup, and not just yours, but of the family, of your children, intergenerational. So in this particular program, happened 20 years ago, we were all very excited about this, and some of us wrote about it along with colleagues in South Africa. You show the violence occurring as it ordinarily would, meaning, the man in charge, I'm the captain of the ship, in the privacy of my home, I can do whatever I wish. The woman in the privacy of her home being violated, can't ask for help, wants her help. Neighbors, they know what's going on, but they don't speak up or they don't intervene because it's a private matter between husband and wife. And this happens for the first few episodes. But then the pen begins to move, the symbolic modeling, the reauthoring of the script. The script writer shows that when the cycle of violence is escalated, when the man is about to beat his wife in a very dramatic episode, the neighbors for the first time come out of their homes, Meta, with pots and pans, because every home has one, and they stand outside the abuser's home and they begin to bang their pots and pans. Now think about this for a moment. This behavior of neighbors coming out and banging their pots and pans was a new behavior in the realm of how you deal with domestic violence.
I bet nobody had never done it before. Ever.
Nobody had never done it before. And the beautiful thing about this, think about it, the banging pots and pans, what are they telling the man? They're saying, we know what you're doing, stop. You are no longer in private space. What are they telling the woman? We are here, we see, we are there with you. It's the same pots that are banging that are sending one message to the violent abuser and another one to the woman, the victim. And what is it telling neighbors all over South Africa? Because it was a very popular program. It's saying you don't have to be a silent colluder. It is possible for you to come out of your homes. This is sort of like it's possible for you to celebrate your girl's birthday. Mm-hmm. It is possible for you to come out of your homes with your pots and pans, because every household has them. And it is important that you come out collectively. Let's invoke Bandura, because he talks about the notion of efficacy, feeling that you can do something. So you may have individual efficacy to come out of your home, but only when you are with neighbors. So collective efficacy. And if you're trying to change a collective norm, which is what social norms are, you need the collective to model it. Much like the village coming together to celebrate a girl's birthday.
That's fascinating, because it makes me think of other situations in which I've heard some discussion about the potential impact of social modeling or of social learning in various contexts. For example, Grossman, what's his first name? Colonel Grossman, anyway, he's a retired...
Dave Grossman?
Huh?
Dave Grossman?
Dave, that's it. Dave Grossman is a retired colonel in the U.S. Army who I gather was in charge of training various soldiers to kill. Mm. Either he was, or he certainly had firsthand experience about it. I don't think he talks about his own role ever, but he certainly was sensitive to the issue, because he wrote a book originally saying that human beings have a natural aversion to killing other people. And so in many wars, they've avoided shooting each other, even when their own lives might be at risk. For example, in the Revolutionary War in the US, somebody counted up, or one of these battles, they counted up the bullets, the spent bullets on the ground, and then the number of people who were hit. And the number of people who were hit was vastly smaller than the number of bullets that were used. So what that meant was these soldiers were firing over their heads or at the ground or something, so as not to kill, because they don't want to kill other people, even if it's a danger for themselves.
Yeah.
So, and then he shows that this was true in many, many wars. People don't want to kill. But then the question was, the US Army found out that they were not, that their soldiers were not doing their jobs as well as they wanted. They were supposed to be killing. And so they invented putting up little targets that look like human beings and having them shoot at those. And then they graduated to using really video games that were training them to shoot very quickly. And of course, with a video game, you're just do it fast.
Yep.
Well, that works. Apparently, it has succeeded in improving the rate, or improving it is not my language, but increasing the rate of killing that people will do. So he's claiming that video games, as most kids use them, actually train them to be violent, and that many of them actually not only learn to want to play, to be violent, but also acquire a certain amount of marksmanship, that you, by using these things, you can actually become a good shot, and a very good, like a marksman, So he claims, he's been following this, and he claims that absolutely every single one of the people whom he has studied, who were mass killers, had an experience of becoming obsessed with video games, had played tremendous number of violent video games. Well, one of my friends here in Toronto has written a lot about that too, Rose Dyson, and she claims, that video games are extremely pernicious socially. Of course, you can't see the social consequences at the statistical level, because there's simply not enough mass killers in a general population to make it show up that, people who, you can't say everybody who's exposed by using video games is going to become a mass killer. That obviously is far from the case. So statistically, it doesn't show up. But I am convinced that, in fact, there really are effects, especially when you find that every single one of the mass killers has been a video game enthusiast. So that is a kind of research that I think would be useful as a way of at least setting the stage for getting people to realize that maybe the exposure that we provide for our children, but even in our own homes for ourselves in watching soap operas or dramas of various kinds, maybe that has significant consequences. Because now at this conference where you and I met, I remember learning a lot about the fact that people learn certain kinds of information, for example, medical information, from shows like ER.
Sure. That
in fact, I think it's been shown that if you ask people questions about various kinds of diseases and the preferred method of treatment for these diseases and so on, that the knowledge that exists in the general population comes primarily from watching dramas like ER. So people are learning things. Are they also learning behavior? And if so, what are the conditions in which they pick up certain kinds of behavior? Now, I would think personally, I would think it would, I would predict, let's say, I would guess
Yeah.
that it would have to do with whether or not you identify with the character. Because if you see a character you don't like, I don't think you're going to copy his behavior. But if the hero performs some atrocity or something, this could really have an impact. Is there much indicating that this is the case, or am I just supposing that it's the case?
No, I think there's tremendous amount of evidence that the pictures in our head, what we are inhibited by or disinhibited by, is a function of what we consume. So I was doing some work in Morocco and in Jordan, looking at the strategies that Daesh, ISIS, or other groups use in order to recruit young extremists, let's say in the Maghreb or in the Middle East. And many of their recruitment strategies, and of course they must know it's effective, begin by taking popular video games in which you are killing people, and whether you're developing marksmanship or whether you're being disinhibited by virtue of, I'm going to get a higher score. So they put into place these kinds of mechanisms. And of course, you can imagine who's being targeted, right? I mean, the person whom you're killing is, somebody from Western Europe or from the US. And the idea is that it becomes normalized. That's the script of. So I think there's ample evidence to suggest that by watching a certain something, and if it goes with your predilections, if it goes with, if you're feeling a little disempowered, and if you are feeling that somebody else is responsible for your oppression and subjugation, that there is, the Satan or the evil, institution or country out there, we do know that you are predisposed to taking on that persona by virtue of vicariously enacting it. But I think the potentiality, this is what Bandura would say, you go back to his work with the Bobo doll experiments, right, that he did at Stanford. And what was
please explain what the Bobo doll was.
Yes. So, where did he, in some ways, validate his theory of social learning? So in the early 1960s, he conducted a series of experiments at the Stanford University campus, mostly with preschoolers, because how do little kids learn new behaviors? And he was very interested in looking at violence. How do they learn violent behaviors? And in the Bobo doll experiment, I'll just describe it very simply. Little children would see a role model come into a play area where there was a Bobo doll, a doll that's anchored at its base. You hit it and it bounces back at you, sort of life size. So the little kids watch a model, a person, smack the heck out of a Bobo doll, jump all over it and kick it and punch it and, use whatever tools there are in the room to, and guess what? After the kids have watched this, they let the kids in to a room with a Bobo doll. And guess what happens? The kids model that same behavior. Interestingly, for Albert Bandura, they modeled even more vicious, violent behavior. So for instance, the model may not have used a gun or may not have used a hammer, but if there was a gun or a hammer lying in the play area where the kids were, they would pick that up. And so in essence, what Bandura is saying, and these effects remained fairly consistent whether you saw the model in real life, a real person, or you saw a model on film, right? Children were, and that's where the notion of symbolic modeling, right? That you can, through a soap opera, as happened with the work of Miguel Sabido in Mexico, who learned about social learning theory, and he said, well, as opposed to teaching young kids about how to model violence, can I create the conditions to have Mexican adults enroll in adult literacy classes, or go to a clinic and ask for contraceptives, right? The learning of new behaviors, the changing of scripts. So, so I think the evidence has been there for a long time that sustained consumption, and not even sustained, for learning new behaviors, you know, even a one-time exposure, as is the case with Bobo doll models, is enough for you to acquire a certain behavior, right?
Now,
And
I don't
Bandura makes it-
remember, I don't remember the Bobo dolls thing so well. It's been 40 years since I read it. Because he lived to be quite an old man, and his research was
Yes,
done.
yeah, yeah,
That Bobo doll stuff was done in the 60s or something like that, wasn't it?
that's correct. Early 60s.
Yeah. But I wonder whether it made any difference what kind of person attacked the Bobo doll as a model. Did adults have more influence than children? If a small child did it, are the other kids less likely to emulate it than if they saw an adult do it? Or if somebody who was identified as a villain did it, did that make any difference? Or did he experiment with those things at all?
Yeah, no, so the Bobo doll experiment, its purpose was, if I remember this correctly, you know, it's been a long time, was to see how those who've not been exposed to a certain behavior, children, preschoolers in this case, learn new models of behavior.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was its purpose, as opposed to who is more likely to, you know, to be violent. However, that question, I mean, you translate that to ISIS, right? The youth that they are recruiting on the web, by having them play certain video games and, you know, using their own channels of those who are already predisposed to the notion that, you know, we have a cause and we need to build a caliphate. They're clearly, you know, they know that these people are more predisposed to participating in this kind of play, and you know, and hence being recruited slowly by virtue, because you're disinhibiting them. You're cultivating in them the notion that it is okay, and isn't it fun to score 1,000, you know, because I killed so many people,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth, or blew them up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, Meta, the real promise for us, you know, Project Save the World, really lies, as Bandura would argue, in how can you create the conditions for more pro-social kinds of behaviors to happen? Can you use gaming, but in a way to perhaps empower a diabetic to understand why it is important for them to be testing? You know, so as opposed to killing people and getting a high score, can you know that you need to be tested at this particular time because you've eaten a certain meal through a gaming environment, and build that sense of agency as opposed to the agency of, well, I can kill. You know, while I'm listening to the story of Grossman, I'm thinking about Lieutenant Colonel Hughes, Lieutenant Colonel in Najaf in Iraq in 2003. He and his Marines found themselves close to the Holy Mosque, where, you know, there's certain remnants of the Prophet Muhammad, and very sacred. And as they are in the vicinity of the mosque, hundreds of people pour out into the streets. And, you know, you've got these 21, 22-year-olds just, you know, taken up position and, you know, their fingers just very nervous on the triggers. And you know, this could be a bloodbath, you know, sort of like My Lai in Vietnam. And Colonel Hughes talks about this. He wasn't trained for this. He was trained to disperse a crowd, like you disperse a crowd when you have a chopper, right? You know, the way a chopper's wings rotate, that's how you disperse a crowd. You know, that's the reason why they've taken up positions as they have. But he has a microphone or a, you know, whatever, a microphone, megaphone. And he basically says, soldiers, guns pointing to the ground. Okay, this is a new behavior that he didn't learn in dispersal of crowds. Take a knee.
Wow.
They take a knee, and he says, with your head down, retreat slowly from behind. And you know, the crowds were coming in. Now, he basically saved, and what happened? You know, this was very surprising for the crowds. They just sort of parted and let them go. You know, so now, this is a story that speaks to me, right? I mean, you know, in some ways, the fact that they're not killing and let's teach them how to kill, well, you know, that's one purpose. But in this day and age, Black Lives Matter, right? De-escalation. You know, it's not just the police. If you have a gun in hand, it doesn't mean that it needs to be fired, right? And I think it is this newness of the training, call it, of de-escalation, which I think has tremendous potentiality, as Bandura would say. You know, like you can learn violent behavior, you can also learn behaviors to de-escalate. And, you know, you can model certain behaviors. For instance, I follow the work, I do some work with the Clinton School of Public Service in Little Rock. And in North Little Rock, there is an officer, a white man, Officer Tommy Norman. And Tommy Norman is the most loved cop in America. You can Google it. Why is he the most loved cop in North America? Because in his North Little Rock neighborhood, which is mostly African-American, when he is driving his squad car, he opens the car and, you know, lets the kids come in, get belted. I'm gonna give you a, you know, a sort of a, yeah, you know, and of course, you know, kids are very enamored by cop cars, no, with their lights on. And if there's a birthday party, you know, he's invited. And let's say somebody's in a wheelchair, he'd bring a little toy blinking light and, you know, now, so he shoots basketball, you know, he skips rope with young girls. And if the kids love him, the community loves him. So the potentiality of these stories of Colonel Hughes or Tommy Norman are what I think grabs me, because I'd like to be transported to that realm. And I hope, you know, this whole notion, as you've said, of polarization, right? And this whole notion of the othering, right? And, you know, I mean, I find the work of Parker Palmer very inspiring. His beautiful book, Healing at the Heart of Democracy, that, you know, in order for democracy to survive, we need to heal inside in terms of how we view the world.
I remember a story. Tomorrow, one of my friends, Andrei Kamenshikov, will be on the show. And I've known him about 20 some years or 30. And I met him in Moscow once with a guy from, I think, Dagestan. It was a time when there were, you know, all these wars going on in that region. And he said that there were gangs of teenage boys who were becoming getting ready to become, you know, violent terrorists of some kind or other. And the problem was, you know, how do you train the police to overcome some of these things? So what his organization was doing, they told me, was they were working with the local police force And for one thing, they had a little manual, a little booklet about citizens' rights. What you have, and so the people are used to seeing if a policeman comes up on their to ring the doorbell, it's bad news. There's up for no good. But what they're doing is coming door to door and giving people this little booklet saying, here are your rights. Please let us know if you have any problems. We're here to serve you. And then he bought teams of soccer team uniforms and soccer balls and all the equipment for soccer. And he would have the police take on the business of teaching these local kids, high school boys, to play soccer as an alternative to the route that they were going on. So you sort of, you know, your guy in Little Rock is a wonderful example of that kind of thing. That's terrific. Well, now my feeling was, I remember watching The West Wing as a pretty good example. I mean, I'm not 100%, but pretty good example of what a good White House administration team would look like. You know, every week they would have one real problem. There's always 3 plots in an hour-long show. And one of them was often about something that was really going on in the US at the time, of controversy. And of course, you know, I've forgotten who was in power at the time. It was before George W. Bush, I think. I don't know Clinton. Who was Clinton. I don't know, because the thing was, I was told that the reason, one person said, and it has a little plausibility, that the reason Al Gore didn't get elected was that Martin Sheen was so much better at being a president than it looked like Al Gore could be. So he looked pale in comparison. But, you know, then I had a conversation with a guy named Grigory Yavlinsky in Moscow, he ran for president of Russia 3 times. And he came in second or third, first couple of times. I'm not sure. He may have done it again recently, a 4th time. I don't know. But at any rate, point is, he's never going to be president of Russia. But he's the only one I would have ever voted for. And I was telling him that, you know, we were talking about Russian political culture, which in those days I thought was a little behind the times, but now I have to say that there are a lot of other countries in the US are just as bad as Russia, and a lot of rulers just as bad as Putin from my point of view, or almost so. But the main thing was that at that point, you know, he was saying, you know, Russians don't have the history of democracy and can't imagine what a good government would look like. And I said, what you need is something like The West Wing, but it would be set in the Kremlin with an excellent Russian president and a good staff and so on. Oh, he was so enthusiastic. He really wanted me to make that happen. And I tried, but it doesn't work. Now, the problem is you can't get Hollywood to take a chance on doing something that risky, you know. Commercially, it's too big a gamble, and Hollywood does not have any interest in trying to create a really far visionary kind of show in which you would see political role modeling that would be really inspiring, or significant changes from the normal assumptions, political assumptions. So what I have thought is I have this brainstorm, and it's not something I can personally carry out, I think, but I've actually thought about it. You know, I mean, I do these talk shows every day, and it wouldn't take much more than another camera or 2, and we could go out in the living room, and I could get my friends to play different characters, and we could get some people to write scripts, and we could have a role modeling soap opera or some, a routine show that we make up and put on YouTube just the way I put these shows up. Now, I really want to get people to thinking in terms of trying such a thing. So a month or so ago, I had Bill Ryerson from the Population Media Center and another friend of mine named Richard Stratton, who had produced another TV show called Street Time that I had sat on the set for about 500 hours watching them produce that show, something like 20 years ago. And so I've seen a little bit of what's involved in producing a TV show. And so I had them on and we talked about the idea of producing a homemade, series drama in which good social behavior and activism, because we need to instill in the notion that ordinary people can participate in doing significant political work and changing their society and so on. That we would have a show about those characters and so on, people who would do that. So, and I asked them, now, am I crazy? Is this ridiculous? Well, no, it's not ridiculous. It was very, very hard work to organize such a thing because I'd need 10, 12, 15 people to participate in one way or another to make it happen. But I want to plant that idea and see, because I think maybe some schools of drama in universities or people teaching communication in universities where they actually do workshops on producing TV and drama and that sort of thing. If I can't do this, maybe somebody else could. Tell me what you think.
No, in this world that we live in, there are all these competing discourses, right? Competing scripts. And, whether it's vaccine hesitancy or a certain version of political morality, and I think there is room principally for alternative scripts, whether it's Colonel Hughes in a de-escalation situation, or Tommy Norman, or, A Girl's Birthday in Bihar, India 20 years ago, to, I'm sure if you had Bill Ryerson, he talked about East Los High and transmedia, I think there is so much room for us to present an alternative discourse. And so Meta, every small new discourse which can transport a few people to a place that they've not been is of value. And as Bandura, I think, would agree, and as those of us who work with the mass media, we know, is that if you have strong characters, and let's go back to this notion of morality, and Miguel Sabido, whom Bill Ryerson knows and works with, often talked about having a very strong moral framework. Now, to Hollywood, the whole notion of morality and so on is going to put them off for whatever reasons. But we know that when somebody has moral authority, and if they take, like a Gandhi or a Mandela or a Mother Teresa or a Václav Havel or Colonel Hughes or Tommy Norman, or a Meta, right? Anybody who brings in a discourse that sort of lifts all of us up, right? That's what moral authority is. And I remember somebody interviewing Mother Teresa, and I had a correspondence relationship with Mother Teresa when I was growing up in India. Really? And yes, and somebody saying that here's the little 4 feet 8-inch woman in a plain white sari, all wrinkled and bent, with a little, white sari and a cross. She could probably walk up to any counter airline anywhere in the world and say, I'd like to be on this flight. And she has that moral authority that she would be on that flight. Now that is, so I don't know who said this, maybe it was Emerson, when he was talking about Plutarch and heroes. For those who have that kind of a capacity, for every virtuous person who has moral authority, there are 999 million patrons of virtue. People who cannot be like them, but who are uplifted by them. And, maybe that's the reason why, 2000 years after Jesus, his parables have so much meaning and value, or, the Aesop's fables, or more recently, Dickens or Harriet Beecher Stowe. They were masters of creating an ongoing story. That's what it was, right? And they were all, Dickens wrote in serialized format. Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote in a serial format. And then, of course, we get their books and we do binge watching or binge reading, right? Much like we do on Netflix. So I think the potentiality is there. It's not a crazy idea. Now, whether it's going to change the world or not, we don't know, but it'll change the world for a few. And if it's done right, whatever that means, if you can bring in the latest sensibilities about transmedia, you can bring in the latest sensibilities about having multiple entry points for people to be pulled in. You'll be surprised. Who knew that little girls' birthdays would be celebrated? Mm-hmm. And if they are celebrating a birthday today, if a little girl can ask her mom, why aren't you celebrating my birthday? By virtue of a little snatch of conversation on a radio soap. And because a birthday is celebrated in a group setting, tomorrow she can ask, why am I not getting a bicycle like my brother?
Yeah. Now, I wonder what I would hope is, it sounds like this was one episode in a drama, or maybe 2 episodes, something like that. But it would be nice to have a drama in which just incidentally somebody comes in, and this is just a side comment. I've just been to the birthday party of the daughter of a family friend, and or I have to buy a gift for this birthday party for this little girl I'm going to. So every few weeks, just as in passing, you would refer to, yes, this is a normal thing. We're all going to birthday parties for little girls nowadays. Right. It show that this is just part of life. That I think is I don't know whether, whether anybody thought about doing that, but I'm thinking of a type of story that is not quite like the Sabido method. The Sabido is I think it requires a lot of I haven't watched enough to know, but it sounds like you have to show rewards and punishments for good behavior and bad behavior. And it sounds kind of like, I'm not sure that my friends want to watch that. But what I think my friends might want to watch, or the people that I want to influence, I hope to influence, would be people who in the normal course of behavior talk about doing things like going to birthday parties for little girls, or attending the all candidates meeting for an upcoming election, and what is the question I'm going to ask each candidate? Help me figure out what is the question I want them to answer. And you would say this is just part of the program, but the rest of the show might be about their love life or their adventures or whatever. Here comes Adam with maybe a question. I don't know. Hi, Adam. What's up? Yes, Adam.
Sorry, my entire apartment lost internet about 10 minutes ago for no clear reason, and it's taken about 10 minutes to turn back on. And
Okay.
it wasn't just my computer matter this time. It was the computer, my roommate's computer, all the mobile devices. It just seems as the whole thing just went offline at once. So my apologies for missing that section of the conversation. It was very interesting.
Okay. Okay, well, never mind. This whole thing is going to require an unusual kind of editing, but it's
Okay.
all right. Okay, but I want Arvind to give me the impression, his impression of whether or not with a more soft-edged, friendly, less rewards and punishment melodrama kind of motif, if I could have a friendlier, more less emotionally intense, but more positive emotions, whether that might work as well as one that really is intending to push a particular change, social change. What do you think?
Meta, I think that, I think one doesn't need to think very big. Small stories can be deeply inspirational. Small stories that transport us to a place where we haven't been, but where we need to go. So, for instance, in my classes, and today I teach my first class this evening at the university, I probably will begin with the story of Abe Lincoln. And the story is simply a Union soldier shaking his hand and saying, "Oh, Mr. President, you're tall. How tall are you?" And Lincoln, in his folksy, charming way, because he's a big fan of Euclid and never went to school, is an autodidact, his response to the question, "Mr. President, you're tall, how tall are you?" is simply, "Son, like you, tall enough that my feet reach the ground." Now, it's a beautiful story, right? I mean, you and I are sitting here and talking about this. It's beautiful at so many levels. Here's a commander-in-chief, the president, talking to an ordinary soldier who realizes this man is tall. That's pretty apparent. And as opposed to saying, "I'm taller than you, I'm 6'4.5", he takes us to a place where we've not been by saying, "Son, like you," and think of the humility, "I'm tall enough that my feet reach the ground." And it's a wonderful way to talk about Euclid and geometry and reference points and how we get so carried away with our notions of status and expertise and measurement. And to sort of, say, you can, I'm not saying you have to be Abe Lincoln, but you can embody that sensibility. So I would love for Meta and Adam and whoever you bring on to just tell these stories. And, they will lift us up because, or Gandhi, he always traveled third class. "Mr. Gandhi, why do you travel third class?" Right? I mean, you're the father of the Indian nation. You should go first class. Like we have Marine One and Air Force One.
Yeah.
And Gandhi's response always was, "I travel third class because, as you know, there is no fourth class."
Isn't that wonderful?
Isn't
I hadn't
it?
heard that story.
Oh my God. And you say, "Oh, look, this is what made him great."
Yes.
Right? It's a different way of thinking. And so yes, you can have characters, you can have melodrama. Just create the conditions for some beautiful stories to be told.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been real and inspiring and lots of fun. It's wonderful. Thanks so